Like Costello and Benowitz, more and more Dulce insiders, engineers, scientists, and security personnel had started to get fed up with the dark activity going on at the complex. Several little disputes and spats occurred as treacherous humans and ETs began to butt heads with other workers whose conscience was eaten away at them. These disputes led to a mini-military conflict that became known as the Dulce Wars. According to Costello and others, the Dulce military conflict began as a result of a resistance movement that began to build up, consisting of both security guards and sympathetic ETs that desired to help the imprisoned humans being cruelly experimented on within the lower levels of the base, which had eventually been closed off to certain worried employees. When the tension reached a boiling point, approximately 100 members of some type of military force were sent in to stop the resistance movement that threatened the established security protocol within the base. Many of the military personnel suffered fatalities while also killing numbers of both resisting ETs and base security personnel. Another well-known Dulce whistleblower is Phil Schneider, who says he worked as a geological engineer in the construction of the Dulce base, as well as other bases around the country and the globe. But here's what he had to say about the infamous Dulce Wars.
The first base is the one at Dulce, New Mexico. I was involved in 1979 in a firefight with alien humanoids, and I was one of the survivors. I'm probably the only talking survivor you will ever hear. 2 other survivors are under close guard. I am the only one left that knows the detailed files of the entire operation. 66 Secret Service agents, FBI, Black Berets and the like died in that firefight. I was there.
Schneider's claims are similar to others when it comes to describing the intense firefight that broke out, but his claims about why the battle in 1979 happened differs.
I was involved in building an addition to the deep underground military base at Dulce, which is probably the deepest base. It goes down 7 levels and over 2.5 miles deep. At that particular time, we had drilled 4 distinct holes in the desert, and we were going to link them together and blow out large sections at a time. My job was to go down the holes and check the rock samples and recommend the explosive to deal with the particular rock. As I was headed down there, we found ourselves amidst a large cavern that was full of outer space aliens. I shot 2 of them. At that time, there were 30 people down there. About 40 more came down after this started, and all of them got killed. We had surprised a whole underground base of existing aliens. Later, we found out that they had been living on our planet for a long time. This could explain a lot of what is behind the theory of ancient astronauts.
An important difference between Schneider's and Costello's accounts is that Schneider said he and other crew members had accidentally built their add-ons to the base on top of an ancient ET base, unaware that they were even there. Some believe Schneider was actually used by the Dulce masterminds as a cover, and that him stumbling upon the ETs deep below was just an act of subterfuge to spark the conflict. In a different way, he certainly testifies the same as Benowitz, Costello, and others, that in 1979, all hell broke loose deep inside the Dulce facility. Are these men telling the truth? Is any of this even possible? Some say that aside from Schneider, none of these whistleblowers even exist, along with the Dulce base itself, and that Schneider is just a fraud. Some will say that this entire hoax manifested with William Moore and the other government agents' disinformation campaign that targeted Paul Benowitz and created confusion within the UFO enthusiast community. Most will make up their mind at this point and conclude that Dulce, Costello, and everything else just didn't happen. However, it would be prudent to at least take a look at Phil Schneider's amazing accounts and mysterious death before we move on to the next topic. Philip Schneider was born on April 23, 1947. Otto Oskar Schneider, Phil's father, was a captain in the U.S. Navy who worked on designing the first nuclear submarines. Schneider's father was also a part of Project Crossroads, which tested nuclear weapons in the Pacific during the summer of 1946. Phil Schneider himself claimed to be a structural engineer and an ex-government geologist. He said he was involved in building deep underground military bases around the United States. He also claimed to possess a Level 3 security clearance, granting him access to top-secret locations and information. His amazing tale of the aforementioned Dulce Wars is what he is best known for. Schneider's reported claim is that 66 American and NATO soldiers were killed in the battle, and Schneider and 2 other men were the only survivors. Over the course of 2 years, the last 2 years of his life in fact, Schneider gave over 30 lectures to audiences around the globe. He covered various topics such as the New World Order, the extraterrestrial presence, and of course, underground bases and the infamous Dulce Wars. His angle of approach was that of a crusader fighting to get out the truth and he claimed to be leaking important information that was often considered classified to the public. There are videos of Philip Schneider's lectures about Dulce and other things on the internet. Once again, there are many that claim that Schneider's story just doesn't check out. His claims are mostly backed by only his words and some small samples of metals and minerals that he claims are unknown to this planet, if you know what I'm saying. It's up to you what to believe about the man and his stories. However, the mysterious circumstances surrounding his death are enough to make you think again. In the tradition of those that would speak out about the government's darkest secrets, many believe Schneider was murdered. Philip Schneider was found dead in his apartment on January 17, 1996, in Wilsonville, Oregon. He had apparently been deceased for a little less than a week and is reported to have had some type of rubber hose wrapped around his neck. The Clackamas County Coroner's Office initially said Schneider's death was either a stroke or a heart attack. He actually claimed to have avoided several murder attempts on his life during the 2 years he was traveling around, speaking out to the public. He suffered multiple physical illnesses, osteoporosis, cancer, and other injuries. Even his ex-wife and mother of his child, Cynthia Dreyer, believes this is the case. Here is Dreyer discussing Phil's injuries, which he originally told her he received while working in Vietnam.
Philip had a great scar that ran down from his throat to his belly button and across his chest from rib to rib. His body was covered with shrapnel wounds. He had burns and skin grafts and missing fingers, and his private part was cut down the center. Part of one of his ears was replaced. He had a metal plate in his head and part of a lung. You could see evidence that at one time he had a halo brace screwed into his head, as there were small indentations at both templates. He had a large hole at the base of his throat where a tracheotomy had been performed. He was in constant pain.
Dreyer later came to realize that Phil had gotten these severe injuries somewhere else, in Dulce. She had stood by Philip and helped him through his hard times and poor health, as well as his speaking tour that is believed to have led to his death.
He wanted to see his daughter grow up, was excited about his lecture tour, and was going to write a book with his friend Mark Ruffner. He often said that if they ever said he had committed suicide, you would know that he had been murdered.
After retracting their claims of heart attack or stroke as the cause of death, the coroner officially stated that Phil Schneider had, get this, committed suicide. Circumstances surrounding the death of Schneider and his autopsy report led many to declare that Schneider had been murdered for going public with his knowledge of reptilians and other ETs, the secret underground bases like Dulce, as well as the horrors that exist within them. Now, while many might still write this all off as pure nonsense, it is quite plausible that the combination of Schneider's testimony, his clear knowledge of geological engineering and mysterious death, later ruled suicide, all supports his claims that an underground base indeed exists at Dulce, and a military confrontation between ET's purported military forces occurred at the lowest levels of this subterranean facility. What's odd about Phil Schneider is that, unlike Thomas Costello, he really doesn't mention the reptilians' role within the Dulce base and conflict. Throughout his various lecture videos, he seems to only bring up the subject of reptile aliens only once. He merely mentions that the reptoids are one of the several races of extraterrestrials that are hunkered down within the Dulce subterranean complex and other bases. However, Al Bielik, who claims to have been part of the infamous Philadelphia experiment, says that Phil had told him of several run-ins he had had with reptilians while working on underground bases. These encounters are separate from the events that occurred at Dulce in 1979. There are very elaborate and colorful yet creepy murals that are displayed in the baggage claim area of the Denver International Airport. Many believe these eerie scenes allude to future military oppression, massive war, and destruction, and the ushering in of a one-world government. The artist who painted the murals, Leo Tanguma, says his work depicts man-made environmental destruction and genocide, along with humanity coming together to heal nature and live in peace. There's a dedication marker in the airport inscribed and dedicated by Freemasons, and this capstone also contains a time capsule. The capstone is mysteriously inscribed with a line that says New World Airport Commission, which is purportedly an advisory committee that was formed while Denver International was being built. The airport also has some freaky-looking sculptures and gargoyles, some of which are very reptilian in nature. Conspiracists have pointed to unusual words cut into the floor as being satanic, Masonic, or just some impenetrable secret code. Words such as, excuse me for mispronouncing this, Kochitopa, Sisnajini, and Zit-Dit-Gai. These words are actually Navajo terms for geographical sites in Colorado. Zit-dit-gai is translated as the mountain that is white in Navajo. There are other floor inscriptions that state Mount Blanca upon the floors at Denver International. Mount Blanca in Colorado is one of 4 sacred sites of the Navajo Indian culture and is said to be where the holy people transformed the sacred mountain, which symbolizes the reproduction of the Navajo people. More interestingly, White Mountain could also refer to Mount Blanc in France, which was the location where the infamous Knights Templars signed their charter. There is also a very peculiar statue of the Egyptian god of death, Anubis, at the Denver airport. Another scary-looking sculpture that greets travelers heading into the complex is a scary blue rearing horse with glowing eyes that has caused controversy due to its sinister appearance, hardly an inviting and reassuring welcome to the airport. Many have dubbed the sculpture Blue Devil's Horse, Satan's Steed, or Blucifer. Luis Jimenez, an American sculptor, was working on the sculpture of a rearing Mustang, intended for Denver International Airport. He was killed in his studio in June of 2006, when an 8-foot-high piece fell on him, severing an artery in his leg. Such rumors are certainly part of the airport's folklore among DIA employees and frequent travelers. There is a pedestrian bridge arching between 2 buildings where visitors will hear the sounds of Native American chants being played from speakers in a continuous loop. The recordings are part of an extensive airport art program and have been playing non-stop 24 hours a day since the airport's opened. The airport was constructed on top of burial grounds and spiritual sites used for centuries by the native tribes that populated the area. The perpetual playing of Native American songs originally initiated by officials as a way to placate any angry spirits who might still remain. Denver International Airport spokespeople deny that the music has anything to do with angry spirits. They surmise that the rumor had its origin in a ceremony that was performed around the time of the DIA's groundbreaking in the late 80s by various Native American shamans to bless the new facility. What they don't mention is the secret ceremony conducted on the grounds of the airport in 1995. That April, the coalition of Native American spiritual leaders from around the country performed a nighttime ceremony at several sites around the airport to put ancient spirits to rest that were disturbed by the construction of the multi-billion-dollar airport. Alex Christopher is a dedicated researcher and author on the subject of UFOs, the Denver airport, underground bases, and the ET presence. Her 2-volume series, Pandora's Box, covers these very topics. What's interesting is she also claims to be an actual eyewitness to the phenomenon, as she reports to have had face-to-face encounters with both reptilians and smaller gray aliens. As the story goes, one late night at 2:30 a.m., she received a frantic phone call from her neighbor in Panama City. Alex's neighbors, a couple, were seriously freaked out about something, and when she ran over to their house to see what was going on, she found the woman passing out with her eyes rolling back in her skull. Alex claims she felt an intense energy in the room at that moment, which she says was definitely radiation. Supposedly, the next day, all of the plants in her neighbor's room had died. When the neighbors had calmed down somewhat, Alex had a chance to figure out what had happened. Her neighbors stated that they were actually having sex at the time when this strange incident happened. The couple said they saw a brilliant flash of light when they were suddenly jerked from their bed by a very powerful force. The man had a huge handprint across the side of his torso that was about 10 inches long. It reportedly left claw marks etched deep into his flesh. As many researchers of reptilians will tell you, these interdimensional beings feed off of intense emotional and sexual energy. Sex is often considered a vital component to many satanic and occult rituals. Those who partake in these ceremonies often use extremely lustful, compulsive, and vulgar sexual acts to summon forth demons and spirits, which many conspiracy researchers believe aren't demons, but other dimensional entities, such as reptilians and other hyper-evolved life forms. Shortly after the frightening event had transpired, Alex herself claimed she had a run-in with the same being. She explains,
I woke up and there is this thing standing over my bed. He had wrapped around yellow eyes with snake pupils and pointed ears and a grin that wrapped around his head. He had a silvery suit on and this scared the living daylights out of me. I threw the covers over my head and started screaming. I mean, here is this thing with a Cheshire cat grin and these funky glowing eyes. This is too much. I have seen this kind of being on more than one occasion. He had a hooked nose and was very human looking, other than his eyes, and had kind of greyish skin.
Alex continues with her amazing story.
In 1991, I was working in a building in the large city and I had taken a break about 6 p.m. and the next thing I knew it was 1:30 p.m. and I thought I had taken a short break. I started remembering that I was taken aboard the ship, through 4 floors of the office building and through a roof. There on the ship is where I encountered Germans and Americans working together, and also grey aliens. And then we were taken to some other kind of facility, and there I saw reptilians again. The ones I call the baby Godzillas that have short teeth and yellow slanted eyes. The things that stick in my mind are the beings that look like reptiles, or the velociraptors. They are the cruelest beings you could ever imagine, and they even smell hideous.
Alex claimed to have worked in the tunnels underneath Denver International Airport. She described what appeared to be vast containment areas for holding prisoners, strange, nausea-inducing electromagnetic forces, and deep caverns so large that trucks could drive through them. Alex Christopher, Phil Schneider, and others claim these tunnels lead to the secret subterranean base that is hidden deep below. This theory has been challenged since the authorities at Denver International have revealed that these tunnels are used for transportation of baggage using conveyor belts. One of the most popular articles that covers the saga of Alex Christopher would be the transcript of a KSEO radio interview conducted by Dave Allen of Leading Edge Research in 1996. The interview, which is heavily circulated across the internet, details certain topics such as the Denver airport, the New World Order, Phil Schneider, ETs, and more. Here are some segments of the interview that are relevant to our film.
You mentioned that the Queen of England has been buying up a lot of property in Colorado under a pseudonym. Why don't we start on the subject of the British?
The major corporations, railroad and banking concerns in this country were set up through a trust that was originally known as the Virginia Company. The deal was that everything would remain under English control or subservient to it, and that brings us right up to today. Because we are still looking at everything falling under the trust system going back to the Crown of England, it appears, from what I have been able to find out, that the Crown of England has had this very skillfully planned for hundreds of years, and it could be possible that they have been privy to information that not many of us have been for a long time, about the chaos involving Earth changes that is coming. It is my understanding that England is not going to make it through the changes, so they set up a whole new empire over here. That goes back to some of the things we discussed before about lands being bought up in Colorado. Yes, the area is of a pretty high altitude where it will be safe.
Shortly after, Dave Allen asks Alex about the mysterious Denver airport and the symbolism behind it.
All the symbolism that is apparent in the layout of the new Denver airport says that it is a control center for world control. There is a lot of secret society symbology at the airport. The Denver area is where the establishment of the western sector of the New World Order will be, in the United States. The capstone, or the dedication stone for the Denver airport, has a Masonic symbol on it. A whole group of us went out to the airport to see some friends off and see this capstone, which also has a time capsule embedded inside it. It sits at the southeastern side of the terminal, which by the way is called the Great Hall, which is what Masons refer to as their meeting hall. And on this thing, it mentions the New World Airport Commission. It also has very unusual geometric designs. It depicts an arm rising up out of it that curves at a 45-degree angle. It also has a thing that looks like a keypad on it. This capstone structure is made of carved granite and stainless steel, and it is very fancy. This little keypad area at the end of the arm has an out-of-place, unfinished wooden block sitting on it. The gentleman that was with me on the first trip out to the airport has since died. They say he committed suicide, but everything else tells me that this is not possible. No one can double tie a catheter behind his own neck and strangle himself. I just don't think that is possible. But his name was Phil Schneider.
Alex Christopher continues on about Schneider and his connections to the airport.
Well, the gentleman that I was dealing with, Phil Schneider, said that during the last year of construction they were connecting the underground airport system to the deep underground base. He told me that there was at least an 8-level deep underground base there, and that there was a 4.5 square mile underground city and an 88.5 square mile base underneath the airport. It is very unusual that they would allot a 50 square mile area on the surface at which to locate an airport in the middle of nowhere, unless they really plan to use it for something very unusual later. There is a 10-mile, 4-line highway out to this airport, and there is nothing out there in between the airport and Denver, not even a service station, at least in September 1995. The people in Denver are really upset with the fact that this airport went in the way it did. There was this fellow who wrote a book in which he made the statement that they had a copy of an audio tape on which a Denver city official was talking with people from the CIA, and that he was paid $1.5 million to allow the airport to be built, no matter what it took.
Alex goes on to say,
If Phil is right, and all this hooks up to the deep underground base that he was offered the plans to build back in 1979, and that what this other man told me in private, that there is a lot of human slave labor in these deep underground bases being used by these aliens, and that a lot of this slave labor is children. He said that when the children reach the point that they are unable to work anymore, they are slaughtered on the spot and consumed.
Here, Alex speaks of the reptilian presence and their connection to the Denver airport and underground bases. This is a reoccurring theme that comes up quite often when researching the reptilians.
In the book Cosmic Conflict, the author talks about the ancient city that was uncovered by the Germans before World War II, and tells about their effort to revive some frozen humans they found in this underground city, and that the true humans couldn't be revived, but the ones that could be revived were in fact reptilians in disguise, and these reptilians have the capability to do shape-shifting and create a holographic image. So when you look at them you see a human. These people that have done all this research and are part of the underground government are telling that the humans on this planet have been at war with these reptilian aliens for thousands of years. At one point, things got so hot on the planet, like it is now. Aliens took on this holographic image and infiltrated the human race in order to take it over and undermine it, just like this new world order is doing right now. They're saying that the same thing happened to civilization on Earth before, and that the humans before actually had the capability for interplanetary travel, and that it was so bad here with the reptilians that they had to leave. These beings that are human-looking that are visiting our planet at this time, trying to inform people what is going on, and guide them, are actually our ancestors that escaped the Earth before, when it was under reptilian domination.
Alan goes on to ask Alex if she knew the reptilians bleed when they get shot, and if they can be killed. She responds,
Yes, if you have the drop on them, they die just like everyone else. They consist of mass just like we do.
Alex Christopher's accounts of the reptilians do seem quite hard to believe, understandably so. However, if her claims are true, it certainly conjures up a very frightening scenario for the human race. Alex sure seems to back up the allegations made by the now deceased Phil Snyder, and there are many other researchers out there that also claim something sinister is going on deep beneath the Denver airport. There are reptilian undertones that certainly do accompany the story of the Denver airport conspiracy, and that is why the filmmakers decided to feature it in this film. Alex's first book, Pandora's Box, The Ultimate Unseen Hand of the New World Order, was so controversial that she claims it drove the CIA crazy, to the point where they actually raided her house in 1994. A revised edition of the book came out in 2007. Could any of this be true? It's up to you to decide.
There you are. What's wrong? What are you doing? Come on.
Dad? Are you all right?
She's mine. And so are you.
By now, you will have seen the many insights into the possible existence of a hollow Earth, or, better yet, a planet with vast, hidden subterranean worlds inside of it. But sadly, it seems many of these underground complexes have been forgotten by history. However, as we just covered, it is evident that many of these complexes are still in use today, not to mention scores of other new underground facilities that have been built by governments worldwide. From the old mythological tales of ancient storytellers to the discoveries of Earl Dorr and Warren Shufelt, to the Native American tribes of the Hopi and Zuni, and more modern accounts such as those at Mount Weather, Groom Lake, the Denver Airport, and Dulce, New Mexico, it is abundantly clear that something strange has been going on underneath our feet for quite some time. Before we move on to more plausible points, here are a few more tales from the underground. I'm personally not sure what to make of all of these tales, but if any of them are true, they paint a horrifying picture of the unknown world that lies below us. The Aborigines call it Calcajaga, a 1,000-foot tall pile of dark boulders stretching 2 miles in length, also known as Black Mountain. It lies a ways from Cooktown and is avoided by natives, as well as many birds and other animals. One story says that long ago, 3 men exploring the mountain on horseback had mysteriously vanished, never to be seen again. Years later, 2 young men intent on solving the earlier disappearances had vanished, as well as 2 Aboriginal trackers who tried to find them. After that, the first officially recorded disappearance was that of a carrier named Grainer, who disappeared along with his horse. Then, 13 years later, a constable named Ryan disappeared while tracking a wanted man to the base of the mountain, neither to be seen again. After that, a gold prospector named Wren vanished and could not be found by the police teams who combed the area for weeks. There's also Harry Owens, who disappeared at the mountain while searching for stray cattle, as did his partner George Hawkins, who went to search for him after alerting police. 2 police trackers entered the caves, but only one came out, and he was so shaken by an experience that terrified him so much that he could give no clear account of what happened.
On an Australian mountaintop. The continent of Australia. 16 miles south of Cooktown, near the northeastern coastline, sits one of the world's most mysterious and menacing geologic features, Black Mountain. Standing nearly 1,400 feet high, the mountain consists of enormous black granite boulders piled precariously one on top of the other. Called Calcajaga, or Mountain of Death by the local Aborigines, Black Mountain, with its numerous dark passageways and caverns, is considered a cursed and evil place.
What the old people told us, when me and my brother Sam, when we were growing up, not to go into the mountains. We wanted to go and have a look into the mountains to see if there was a cave where you could walk in, but they said no, if you do go in, you won't come back.
Some UFOologists in Australia say that this is the entrance to an underground empire, inhabited by an unearthly race of lizard creatures and evil monsters. The Aborigines don't call them aliens, they call them demons or spirits.
Tales of the Rainbow Serpent are among the most important of the Aboriginal lore in Australia. It can be a punisher of those who are out of line. It sometimes swallows people. It can bring chaos and destruction, so it's a very awesome force.
The Rainbow Serpent is a creator for us, and it was told by our old people that the Rainbow Serpent created everything for us. It's a giver of life for us. And this boulder rock here, Calcajaga, is very important because the Rainbow Serpent lives in the mountains here.
Many researchers claim this megabase is actually a secret headquarters for the New World Order and is linked to claims of mind-controlled slaves and military personnel, black projects and large-scale surveillance operations, and even claims of gray aliens and reptilian beings. The facility is believed to house several levels of computer mainframes connected to major networks all over the world, a potential electronic control and surveillance center used to monitor the masses. An old article from Fate magazine detailed the story of Alfred Scatting of Toronto, the sole survivor of the 1936 Moose River mine disaster. He repeatedly insisted that night before the disaster occurred, he saw a strange light swinging about 2 feet above the ground in a side shaft where no one else was supposed to be, and following the collapse, he and a colleague, Dr. Eddie Robinson, who did not survive the incident, heard sounds of shouting and laughter as of little people having fun. This was heard for the span of almost 24 hours. There are many tales of secret subterranean worlds abound in Chinese folklore. There is an ancient book entitled The Report Concerning the Cave Heavens and Lands of Happiness in Famous Mountains by Tu Quang Ting, who lived from 850 to 933 AD. This ancient text lists 10 major and 36 smaller cave heavens that exist beneath the mountains in China. Paul Dorr, in issue number 6 of his newsletter, Unknown, related the tradition concerning a race of human giants which, according to stories in the Carolina Islands, and especially Papua, allegedly went underground in ancient times. Once inhabitants of an island continent called Shama, they will, according to legend, one day re-emerge. This legend is widespread throughout Malaysia, which incidentally contains the largest officially recognized cavern chamber of the Sarawak Chamber on the island of Borneo in the Malaysian Islands. The chamber was discovered by 3 Englishmen in January 1981. It is located in the unpopulated area of the Gunung Mulu National Park jungle in Sarawak in the north of Borneo. The 3 explorers stumbled into what seems to be a huge cavern, and even with their powerful lamps, they could not see the other end of the chamber. Little did they know they had entered the largest known enclosed space in the world. According to many Buddhists and Hindus, Kasmira is one of many entrances into the underworld, consisting of 7 patalas. Some legends say these 7 realms are the abode of the reptilian humanoids or Nagas, of which we covered extensively in this film and the last. The tale of the king Bunandana speaks of the king and his men allegedly entering this domain of forbidden pleasures via a portal in the peak of Pradyumana. The underground journey took 5 days and nights. Upon arriving, the king and his men encountered a frightening world with strange viper-faced beings. The capital city of the 7 patalas is believed by some to be Bogavita, also known among Hindus as Nagaloka, which means snake world. As this story goes, in 1949 or 50, 3 men were exploring a cavern that lies to the north of McAlester, Oklahoma. This cavern was said to exist underneath a haunted mound, which was the scene of strange sightings, animal mutilations, and missing livestock. Upon entering the cavern, the 3 men descended for nearly a mile, and with no sight of the bottom at all, the 3 decided to head back to the surface. After the first 2 had emerged, they heard screaming from below, as well as several gunshots from their partner's .45 revolver. After finally meeting his friends at the surface, the 3rd man was terrified, as he spoke of hairy beastmen who tried to attack him. The man supposedly even had a weird yellowish-type blood on him, which he drew from one of the creatures after hitting it with a round. A December 1949 issue of Amazing Stories magazine covers 2 young men who were exploring the high slopes of Mount Lassen, about 7,500 feet above sea level. The 2 men reportedly discovered a tunnel with smooth, glazed walls that lied behind an outcropping of rock. While inside the strange cavern, they claimed they were captured by men dressed like regular people. The story goes on to claim that these people were being mind-controlled by some alien force. Others have reported abductions near Mount Lassen by a human-reptilian collaboration. A 1975 Los Angeles Times article covers a mysterious network of underground tunnels and rooms that were discovered beneath the immediate area of the mysterious mining town in Eureka, Nevada. Northwest of Pahrump lies Devil's Hole National Monument, which is an annex of Death Valley National Monument. Devil's Hole is a seemingly bottomless aqua cave containing a certain species of cavefish that is found nowhere else in the world. Like the legendary subterranean Grand Canyon we mentioned earlier, discovered by Earl Dorr, the water level at Devil's Hole also repeatedly rises and falls with the tide. This may suggest a connection to a massive underground sea, possibly in the area of eastern Nevada and western Utah. Several people have disappeared trying to explore Devil's Hole, and Navy scuba divers were lowered on cables and reported seeing large subterranean river which roared up from below and eventually plunged down into an abyss. At 103rd Street in Amsterdam lies the Episcopal Church of St. John the Divine. This building reportedly conceals the entrance to an underground cavern, which several reports suggested were used by an occult lodge. The caverns were also believed by some to be the remnants of an actual ancient city created by some civilization of former sub-inhabitants who dwelled along the eastern seaboard. About 50 miles south of Pittsburgh, in the Allegheny Mountains, George A. LeHue reportedly found a cavern which he penetrated for over a mile, the passages becoming increasingly wider as he descended further. He reached a room in which he found a 6-foot-wide thermal bore, a perfectly circular shaft with smooth glazed walls that had apparently been melted through the earth in some ancient time. Old-timers in the area alleged that 6 survivors in 1915 took gear and equipment and spent a month exploring the cave, going 18 miles from the entrance and down almost 5 miles below sea level, where they distinctly heard the rumble of machinery off in the distance. A New York newspaper article from 1903 covers the haunted Refugio mine in the Chispa Mountains, 60 miles southwest of Alpine, Texas. Legends say the mine had mysteriously been abandoned, despite a large amount of silver still remaining within. Years later, an investigator named Boyd attempted to enter the mine, but a thunderous noise and a rush of air came from the tunnel, thrusting him against the opposite wall. Screams of terror could also be heard emanating from deep within. Later attempts to work the mine ended in injury and terror, as some of the men who later attempted to enter the mine were thrown repeatedly against the tunnel walls as if by an invisible force. Between 1945 and 1950, the infamous Richard Shaver created quite a stir in Amazing Stories magazine after sending a strange letter to editor Ray Palmer. Originally titled A Warning to Future Man, Shaver spoke of odd experiences where he could hear people's thoughts while working with a particular arc welding machine at an auto plant in Detroit. Shaver claimed the machine gave him the ability to hear the thought waves of fellow factory workers and other people nearby. Shaver also believed that actually many of the voices that he heard were not coming from the factory itself, but they were really emanating from caverns deep below. Shaver also told of how he visited these mysterious caves, first under Detroit and also under the east coast of Delaware Bay, via a boat which he navigated the water-filled passage for a few miles until he supposedly reached an underground city. After dangerous encounters with strange beings, Shaver left the cave and never returned to the inner world physically. However, he continued to receive thought beams, which he claimed were originating from inside the earth. We mentioned Mount Blanca earlier in regards to the Denver airport. It is located in the remote San Luis Valley of Colorado, which has been an area of UFO sightings and animal mutilations for years. Many southwestern Indian tribes have legends involving caverns below Mount Blanca, San Luis Lakes, and Great Sand Dunes National Monument region, through which their ancestors migrated during the time of natural disasters before emerging to the surface once again. There have been some rumors of an attempted government attack on an underground alien base beneath Mount Blanca using a deadly nerve agent which backfired, harming the forces that set it off. On December 26, 1945, there was a terrible mine explosion in the Belleville mine, which trapped several of the miners. Some of the survivors who were rescued repeatedly insisted that they saw a segment from one of the mine's walls open like a door. The bewildered men claimed that a man dressed as a lumberjack emerged through the doorway. After assuring the men that they would be rescued, the strange lumberjack figure then went back into the brightly lit room and closed the door. Other similar accounts have been reported during similar mine disasters, such as the one at a Shipton, Pennsylvania mine, where similar lumberjack-type men have been seen. John Uri Lloyd's book, Edidorpa, which is Aphrodite backwards, speaks of a hidden cave that leads to a mysterious underground world. Southeast of Salem is Hodge's Cave, which some believe is based on the cavern that is mentioned in Lloyd's book. Interestingly enough, the illustrations for Edidorpa were drawn by a high-level Freemason. Several witnesses have stated that they have actually seen Masons wandering about the cavern. One report tells of a nearby stone staircase leading deep into a gloomy darkness of the earth, which witnesses failed to fully investigate as they were hit with an overpowering sense of terror, literally stopping them from descending any further. There's an old tale of an English farmer in 1770 who moved a large, flat stone he found in a field while digging a trench one day. Underneath a large rock, he discovered a stone staircase which he followed deep down into the earth until he emerged into a large underground chamber several hundred feet below. Within this cavern, the man witnessed strange objects and machinery. Supposedly, there was also a luminous sphere which lit up the area, revealing someone wearing a cloak and sitting on a throne. The entity suddenly stood up, brandishing a staff-like object in his hand, which he used to smash the glowing orb, plunging the cavern into darkness. The frightened farmer quickly scrambled back up the stairs. The story soon spread that one of the secret chambers where the Rosicrucians hoarded their scientific secrets had been discovered. There are many old stories that speak of a time before the British government sealed up several tunnels, when one could walk from one end of Malta to the other using this extensive underground system. One of these well-known labyrinths is the Hypogeum of Sal Saflienti, in which excavators discovered the bones of over 33,000 people who had been sacrificed by an ancient pagan cult. The August 1940 issue of National Geographic told of several school children who had disappeared without a trace in the Hypogeum. A British embassy worker named Lois Jessup convinced a local guide to let her explore a 3-foot square burial chamber next to the floor of the lowest room within the 3rd sub-level of the catacombs. The guide reluctantly agreed, and Lois crawled through the passage until emerging on a ledge overlooking a deep chasm. In total shock, she saw a procession of tall humanoids walking along another ledge in the opposite wall of the chasm. Frightened, she quickly left the ledge and went back up through the burial chamber. Lois later returned again after the school children and their teacher disappeared. Reportedly, frantic mothers of several of the missing children swore that for a week or more following the event, they could hear their children crying and screaming as if from underground. In 1968, archaeologists explored burial chambers, tunnels, and catacombs, several of which are linked together at the lower levels, near Derinkuyu, Turkey. Supposedly, they had reached a depth of about 900 feet when they were suddenly attacked by a group of 7-foot-tall albino humanoids. All of them were wounded by these mysterious beings. In Pamukkale, formerly known as Hierapolis, there is an ancient cavern that runs adjacent to the ruins of the Temple of Apollo. This was built long ago by the ancient Grecian Empire. Strange disappearances have surrounded this cavern as far back as ancient times. The Greek philosopher Strabe recorded that many animals who entered the cavern never emerged, and many people who have gone past the mouth of the cave never returned as well. Only ancient sorcerers, who had apparently made an alliance with the gods of the underworld, would be able to enter the intimidating subterranean world. Upon re-emerging, many of them would reportedly be glowing with a reddish aura. Sheldon Aronson, a professor of microbiology at Queens College, New York, told Omni magazine that several Australian students had entered the cavern and disappeared in 1987. Sheldon stated that, quote, "The Turkish government put iron bars over the opening to prevent other people from ever going in. As far as we know, the Australians were never seen again."
What's the deal with those shape-shifting reptilians?
There is no animal on Earth that has been revered so highly to the influence of man and his religion than that of the serpent.
A race of tall reptilian beings lives among us and even drives our government.
Of course. What the fuck is it hurt a person to say, no, I'm not reptilian?
And the ultimate.
She catches with his little fucking green legs crossed. Are you a lizard person? Louis a little left-leaning. No, sir. I'm not. Let him answer. Are you a lizard?
sure they never return to the days where they would crawl up out of the sewer and eat our young. Reptilian.
It's a bizarre story, but you know what? Who knows?
So no, there are no shape-shifting reptilians out there.
your air chariot.
Yes! Hail, omnipotent one! Hail to thee and all thy radiant majesty! You've got them eating out of your hands, Serpentor. Of course, you and I know your primary function will be as a figurehead, a sterling symbol of the power and unanimity of Cobra.
We're here to see Kane.
And you are?
Coltrane, Grid Police. And you are?
Dr. Shade, Kane's personal physician. Follow.
Come, Teddy. Follow.
Follow.
They think the cops are part of this reptilian conspiracy as well. That's why Shannon attacked Greg.
Let's try this again.
These creatures look like humanoid reptilians. They're usually between 6 feet, 7 feet tall, and people describe them as scaly or greenish.
I'm so scared in my life!
It's Venture's lizard man! I guess we should count our lizards before they're hatched.
New Mexico's got everything. And the golf, it's amazing.
Yeah, it looks great.
It is great. Here, got you the brochure.
Thanks.
All right, listen to me, Chief. Look at me. Use it, okay? You need to start taking care of you.
The word is out. New Mexico may just be the best place in the universe.
As you may recall, the Irish author Bram Stoker was an initiate of the secret society known as the Golden Dawn. As we covered in the first plausible points, this organization also had other influential members including W.B. Yeats, Aleister Crowley, and Jules Verne. Stoker published his most popular book in 1897, which of course is Dracula. This amazing story is responsible for generating the massive popularity of the modern-day vampire mythos, which has seen a huge resurgence in recent years. Stoker spent decades researching countless vampire legends. It is a fact that there is no area of the world and no age in history that does not have its vampire stories, myths of evil beings who feed off the blood and energy of others. As key researcher David Icke poses in his books, there is a significant connection between the notion of vampires like Dracula and Draco the Dragon, or reptilians.
His name is Dracula. The Draco constellation is the alleged home of the royal reptilian bloodlines. He is called Count Dracula, symbolic of the way these Draco bloodlines have been carried by human royalty and aristocracy. Dracula is a vampire, symbolic of the need of the Draco reptilians to drink human blood and feed off human energy. Dracula shapeshifts, appears and disappears, symbolic of the reptilian shapeshifters.
Icke continues,
he cannot stand direct sunlight, exactly what Credo and others say of the reptilians and Greys. He comes in through windows, symbolic of the interdimensional portals through which reptilian entities enter our world.
In regards to vampires, many of the old legends state they only come in if you invite them in. This could be symbolic of the ancient dark priests who would call upon the gods through invocation in occult rituals. During these black magic rituals, the occultists were inviting the entity into our world through some type of interdimensional portal. Stoker's character was largely based on Vlad the Impaler, the 15th century ruler of Wallachia, near the Black Sea in modern-day Romania. This area of the globe was once called Transylvania, and this is where the most prevalent vampire legends emanate from. The vast Danube River Valley, which covers from Germany to Romania and onto the Black Sea, is the source of many of the elite bloodlines from aristocratic families that have ruled throughout history. Vlad the Impaler is well known for his barbarous ways. He slaughtered thousands upon thousands of people, many of whom were innocent men, women, and children. He applied gruesomely painful techniques to torture and murder his victims, including burning, dismembering, drawing and quartering, and most famously, impalement. On St. Bartholomew's Day in the year 1459, Vlad's minions impaled 30,000 people in the city of Brasov in Transylvania. Many of you who are familiar with the subject will recall that he would sit amid the forest of dead bodies, even dipping his bread in their blood while eating his meals. Vlad had his staked bodies arranged in different geometric patterns and designs, and supposedly the height of each spear determined the rank of the victims. Obviously, we can say that Vlad the Impaler certainly utilized his reptilian brain, which is cold, calculated, and very obsessed with ritual. Vlad the Impaler's father was Vlad Dracul, or Vlad II. He was appointed military governor of Transylvania on February 8th in 1431 at the fortress of Sighisora in Transylvania. Vlad III, or Vlad the Impaler, was born into the Wallachian princely house of Barsarab the Great. Vlad Dracul was later initiated into the Ancient Order of the Dragon by the Holy Roman Emperor in the same year. The order's emblem was a dragon with extended wings, hanging on a cross. Vlad the Impaler also wore this emblem, and his currency portrayed the dragon symbol as well. Members of the order had dragon imagery on all of their coats of arms, and many carried the name Dracul, which meant devil or dragon. Vlad II signed his name Draculia, which means the devil's or dragon's son. This later evolved into Dracula, a word that translates to something along the lines of the son of him who had the Order of the Dragon. This very same order is alive today as the Imperial and Royal Dragon Court and Order. It was more recently promoted by the British Holy Grail author Sir Lawrence Gardner. Gardner had since stepped down due to internal disagreements between initiates. Lawrence Gardner is accused by several supposed mind control victims, eyewitnesses, and researchers of being possessed by a reptilian entity. It's also worthy to note that Queen Mary, or Mary of Teck, the mother of King George VI and grandmother to Queen Elizabeth II, actually descended from a sister of Vlad Dracul or Dracula. It is also true the Bush family, who are descendants of the Windsor, Saxe, Coburg, Gotha bloodline, are related to Dracula as well. Many people will recall in the first film how we briefly covered the supposed ex-mind control slave named Arizona Wilder. We showed a segment of her interview with David Icke from the Revelations of a Mother Goddess video. In it, Wilder claimed that Sir Lawrence Gardner was actually a reptilian shapeshifter who participated in satanic human sacrifice rituals. Stuart Swerdlow from the infamous Montauk Project, who we also covered in the first film, says that he also witnessed Gardner take part in blood rituals at the Montauk facility in New York. Sir Lawrence Gardner was the Chancellor and Attaché to the Grand Protectorate of the Imperial and Royal Dragon Court and Order, or Ordo Dragonis. This royal court of the dragon sovereignty, as we just mentioned, had first emerged in Egypt about 2200 BC. Gardner was also the prior of the Celtic Church's Sacred Kindred of St. Columbia and Chevalier de Saint Germain, as well as presidential attaché to the European Council of Princes, which is formally connected to the noble household guard of the Royal House of Stuart, founded in 1692. Sir Lawrence died in 2010 after suffering from various illnesses. He had gained fame in more recent years for his books that claim that the Merovingian bloodline is really the bloodline of Jesus, which he covers in his books, Bloodlines of the Holy Grail and Genesis of the Grail Kings, the explosive story of genetic cloning and the ancient bloodline of Jesus. Researchers, like David Icke and others, believe the Merovingian bloodline is actually one of the key reptilian bloodlines from which many of the world leaders and royalty, spanning the centuries, genetically descended from. It is interesting to note that Sir Lawrence Gardner himself calls these dragon bloodlines. He says the term dragon really refers to the life oils, the crocodile fat or messa used in the royal ceremonies of ancient Egyptian mystery schools. Sir Lawrence believed he was directly connected to the royal house of Stuart through these very bloodlines, and therefore claimed the right to the British throne himself. Gardner also spoke about the drinking of menstrual blood, or what he called starfire. He even mentioned it once in the interview for Nexus magazine, a magazine which also vehemently spoke out against the claims made by Arizona Wilder and others. Wilder even states that starfire was her codename when she supposedly carried out these sacrificial rituals while in the mind control state. Also, in Nexus magazine, Lawrence Gardner acknowledges that ancient legends literally do speak of serpent gods, and he goes on to say that it is astonishing in these more enlightened times that anyone still believes it. Here are some of Gardner's quotes from a Nexus magazine article where he discusses the ancient dragon court, starfire, and vampiric legends, as well as the dragon bloodline theme and symbolism.
At this stage, it is of interest to note how it was that the Christian Church eventually demolished the true significance of the starfire ritual by maneuvering it into the realm of sinister Gothic legend. In the old tradition, the ultimate holders of the Morcut were known as dragons or pendragons, and the reigning head was always known as Draco. They were in fact princes of darkness, and they gained their heightened awareness above normal powers and longevity from the starfire, the lunar blood of the Anunnaki queens, and the priestly scarlet women. The brutal Catholic inquisitions of the Middle Ages were set against all the so-called heretics who, in one way or another, supported the messianic blood royal, the sangreal of the dragon kings against the corrupted dogma of the bishops. Many of the victims were classified as occultists and witches, and they were charged with upholding the ancient and heretical cult of Draco, the Prince of Darkness. They were proclaimed by the church authorities to be vampires. I previously mentioned the significance of the ancient Egyptian court of the dragon, pointing out that after some 4,000 years this sovereign order is still operative today. Back in the 15th century, a prominent chancellor of the court was Prince Vlad of Transylvania, Wallachia, who built the citadel of Bucharest. Vlad is perhaps better remembered as Count Dracula, meaning son of Dracul, a name by which his father was known within the court from 1431. The establishment's real fear of Dracula, however, was not his savage treatment of enemies. Such things were commonplace in their day, but his in-depth knowledge of alchemy and the ancient starfire customs. Having attended the Austrian school of Solomon in Humanstadt, he had an in-depth scientific understanding of the bodily effects of melatonin and serotonin, which enhance longevity and increase consciousness.
The original Order of the Dragon can first be identified as the Dragon Court of Ancient Egypt. This organization was under the patronage of the priest Prince Akhfun Khonsu around 2170 BC. It was later established more formally as a pharaonic institution by the 12th dynasty queen Sobeknefru, who we mentioned in our More Mythology chapter. The court's operation was much like a present-day royal academies, being a unique assembly of sacred science and knowledge. The Dragon Court's priestly pursuits were heavily associated with the teachings of Thoth, who is said to be the father of alchemy and Hermeticism. The temples were not solely associated with religion, but also with the duties of preserving and teaching the old wisdom, or Al-Chem. Adept members of these temples incorporated this into their rituals, and this is where the term alchemy comes from. The temple initiates maintained the spiritual welfare of the pharaohs and preserved the heritage of the royal bloodline, which progressed through the dragon queens of the matrilineal Grail succession. Centuries later, in December of 1408, the Dragon Court was formally reinstated by King Sigmund von Luxemburg of Hungary. This king, along with 22 other royals and noblemen, made an agreement to honor the true and pure fraternity within the Society of the Dragon, or Societas Draconis. This name later changed to Ordo Draconis. An interesting side note would be that the patron of the order is none other than St. George, the Dragon Slayer. So it would also seem the reoccurring theme within the tales of the Anunnaki is vampirism. Other similarities between the vampire legends and tales of the Anunnaki include shape-shifting, hypnotism, and connections to secret societies and occultism, as well as black magic. The reptilian Anunnaki, like traditional vampires, have eternal or very extended lifespans. David Icke poses the theory that fourth-dimensional reptilian beings actually wear their human bodies like a genetic overcoat, and when one body dies, the same reptilian entity moves on to another body and thus continues on for another generation. It is very clear from the old legends that the Anunnaki did indeed drink blood, and sacrificial blood rituals were also held to appease them. Some modern-day researchers suppose that this was done in order to exist in this dimension and hold a human form. With this also comes the stories of shapeshifting, where new and old accounts speak of the serpent gods being able to change between human and reptile. This is also apparent with the tales of vampires changing into a bat or a wolf or even mist. Many modern-day researchers on reptilians will also draw a comparison between the Anunnaki's ability to feed off fear, aggression, and other negative emotions. This too comes into play with the vampiric legends, as vampires are said to feed off of human emotions as well, and this is also related to the phenomenon known as psychic vampires. In addition to the need for blood as a vital life force, the Anunnaki are also addicted to adrenochrome, or adrenaline hormone that is released in the human body during moments of extreme terror. Ike and others claim that the origin of the vampire stories literally emanate from the ancient blood drinking and energy sucking rituals of the Sumerian Anunnaki and other ancient cultures. He writes, "It was called soma, and in Greece it was called ambrosia," some researchers suggest. This was said to be the nectar of the gods, and it was the reptilian gods who are genetic blood drinkers. The reptilian Anunnaki and traditional vampires both share the capacity to hypnotize. Many researchers believe that the reptilian bloodlines have the ability to produce an extremely powerful hypnotic stare, in the same way that a snake can hypnotize its prey before it strikes. This is said to be the actual origin of the term known as the evil eye. There is also a strong sexual and occult connection between the vampire and victim. The seductiveness and allure that distinguish many vampire texts are not found in the tales of the Anunnaki. Instead, the sexual bond between the Anunnaki and their victims is characterized by violence, rape, murder, and satanic ritual. The demons honored or appeased by satanic sex magic rituals are believed by Ike and others to be none other than the reptilian Anunnaki. Finally, another shared trait between the traditional vampire and the reptilians would be the role of secret societies. David Icke's chief contributions to the discourse on the vampire lies in his immersion of this figure into a vast web of clandestine organizations, from ancient mystery schools and cults like the Brotherhood of the Snake to the Knights Templar and the Masonic Order, from global entities like the UN, the Trilateral Commission, and the Council on Foreign Relations to drug cartels, satanic churches, and the black nobility. The keystone in this architecture of conspiracy is the Order of Draco, which conjures up the most famous of all vampires, Count Dracula, and underscores his demonic, draconian, and of course, his reptilian associations.
Shapeshifted in front of him, turned into a reptile, and then came back to human, and then shapeshifted again.
Presidents are not elected by ballot, they are selected by blood. This is a vicious group of interbreeding bloodlines seeking to impose their will and their structure of life upon the global population.
David Icke's own research, as well as other experts on this subject, suggest that at least in their highest form, the reptilians actually emanate from another dimension just outside our own. This is the fourth dimension, to be exact, and it is said that this is where these diabolical entities manipulate and control those that live within the lower dimensions, including us. This could be the actual source of the age-old myths and legends found all across the world of angels, demons, spirits, and so on. Many scientists are now confirming that what we call creation exists in an infinite number of frequencies or dimensions. As Icke so cleverly puts it, these dimensions share the same space in the same way that radio and television frequencies do. At this moment, you are tuned to the three-dimensional world, or third dimension, and so that is what you perceive as your reality. In other words,
you are tuned to this station, but as with radio and television, all the other stations are broadcasting at the same time. And if you move your radio dial or change the TV channel, you can connect with them. When you do this, the station or channel you were tuned to before does not disappear. It continues to broadcast, but you can't hear it or see it anymore because you are no longer on its wavelength. So it is with human consciousness.
Psychics and others with enhanced mental abilities, such as seeing spirits or clairvoyance, are simply a person's ability to move the dial to another station, so to speak. As David Icke and other researchers pose, it is from one of these other stations that the serpent race is based, and it is from this other dimension that they cross over to meddle in our affairs. Better yet, many of these researchers will say that our world is being controlled through human emissaries, members of certain genetic streams that are literally possessed by these entities. The lower fourth dimension is the one nearest to our physical world. Some call this the lower astral dimension, the infamous home of spirits, demons, and other entities going back to ancient times. It is from here that today's Satanists summon forth demonic entities in black magic rituals. The difference here, at least according to some researchers, is that Satanists and other sorcerers are actually summoning the higher dimensional reptilians from the lower fourth dimension. It is even believed by some researchers that the interdimensional reptilians were able to enter our world through holes that were torn in the space-time fabric, which were caused by government nuclear tests that started in the American Southwest in the early 1940s. Of course, most hold the idea that the serpent race has been with us since mankind's beginnings or earlier. Maurice Doreal, whose real name is Claude Doggins, was a metaphysicist and head of the Brotherhood of the White Temple, an occult fraternity headquartered in Colorado that he founded in 1930. As a youth, he became interested in fiction literature and also studies on the occult. Doreal served in World War I, after which he claimed he spent 8 years in Tibet. He spent much of his life writing his Brotherhood teachings and pamphlets, knowledge which he claimed to have gained from his contact with the Great White Lodge of Masters, beings who supposedly have passed beyond the earthly realm and now seek to guide humanity in its evolution. Doreal claimed that following a lecture of his in California, he was approached by two blonde-haired and blue-eyed men who offered him a tour of an underground city below Mount Shasta in Northern California. Doreal died in 1963, and he was most noted for his discovery of the Emerald Tablets of Thoth. The Emerald Tablets of Thoth were ancient tablets which supposedly were discovered beneath the Mayan temple in Mexico. It is unclear whether these tablets differ from the ones allegedly discovered in Egypt, or whether these relics are even genuine or not. But either way, they explain the possible existence of fourth-dimensional reptilian entities perfectly. The strange accounts in the tablets correlate quite well with modern reports. It is claimed that the Emerald Tablets date back some 36,000 years and were written by the priest king Thoth, who we mentioned in the first film. He is said to have founded a colony in Egypt and is the father of alchemy. As the saga goes, the ancient tablets were moved to South America by ancient Egyptian priests and eventually placed under a sacred Mayan temple in the Yucatan, Mexico. Maurice Doreal is the translator of these tablets. He claims to have been the one that recovered them, and he completed the translations in 1925. Oddly, Doreal claims that he was not given permission to publish the tablets until years later. However, as David Icke puts it, you don't have to accept the details of that story to appreciate the synchronicity between what these tablets say and what is now being uncovered. Here are some quotes from the Emerald Tablets of Thoth. If they are truly genuine, then they paint a very frightening picture of the world that exists just beyond our senses.
Far in the past, before Atlantis existed, men there were who delved into darkness, using dark magic, calling up beings from the great deep below us. Forth came they into this cycle, formless were they, of another vibration, existing unseen by the children of earth men. Only through blood could they form being, only through man could they live in the world. In ages past were they conquered by the masters, driven below to the place whence they came. But some there were who remained, hidden in spaces and plains unknown to man. Lived they in Atlantis as shadows, but at times they appeared among men. Aye, when the blood was offered, forth came they to dwell among men. In the form of man moved they amongst us, but only to sight were they as our men, serpent-headed when the glamour was lifted, but appearing to man as men among men. Crept they into the councils, taking form that were like unto men, slaying by their arts the chiefs of the kingdoms, taking their form and ruling over man. Only by magic could they be discovered, only by sound could their faces be seen. sought they from the kingdom of shadows to destroy man and rule in his place. But know ye, the masters were mighty in magic, able to lift the veil from the face of the serpent, able to send him back to his place. Came they to man and taught him the secret, the word that only a man can pronounce swift. Then they lifted the veil from the serpent and cast him forth from place among men. Yet beware, the serpent still liveth in a place that is open at times to the world. Unseen, they walk among the in places where the rites have been said. Again, as time passes onward, shall they again take the semblance of men.
As I just mentioned, if the Emerald Tablets are genuine writings, then it spells out a very scary scenario for mankind's future, as well as our past, which has been maliciously contrived by an ethereal serpent race. Some researchers claim that those most aligned with the reptilian genetic blueprint are the elite families who control the world to this day. For that reason, Diana, Princess of Wales, used to call the Windsors the lizards and the reptiles, and said with complete seriousness, they are not human. This claim was reportedly made to David Icke by a close confidant of Diana of 9 years. Many researchers theorize that the reptilian Anunnaki certainly intended to take over the planet when they arrived here long ago. For years and years, the Anunnaki lived openly as reptilian entities, but over time, they began experiencing defiance and hostility from their human subjects who greatly outnumbered them. Because of this, they literally went underground, or undercover if you will. The serpent race then set out to hijack the planet by appearing as human beings. It is also believed that other human hosts with less pure reptilian blood are people that are possessed by reptilian entities from the lower fourth dimension. Certain psychics and people with extrasensory powers are said to see beings who appear as essentially human to the average person, but are actually overshadowed by a reptilian. The elite families are said to interbreed so they can infuse these reptilian genetics with their own bloodlines to make it easier for them to be possessed. Those who have smaller amounts of reptilian genes are still able to be controlled in this manner. It is also believed that this is why the Illuminati families keep such detailed records of their bloodlines in order to keep track of which people can be possessed more easily than others. They also intermarry in order to keep their reptilian genes and its associated power confined within their small circle of influence. However, the serpent race seeks to influence all people by stimulating the crude behavior patterns of the triune or reptilian region of the brain. As we discussed before, these are things like hierarchical thinking, aggression, conflict, division, lack of compassion, and the need for ritual. The ancient book of Enoch even states that those born from the Nephilim bloodline, what many researchers believe are reptile-human hybrids, are because of their ancestry destined to, quote, afflict, oppress, destroy, attack, do battle, and work destruction on the earth. David Icke interprets this as certain people being able to be possessed by the ancestral spirit of the Nephilim, or rather, the reptilians from the fourth dimension. Icke continues in regards to the Book of Enoch.
In the United States, there is an organization called the Sons of Jed, named after the father of Enoch. They pledge an implacable war against the descendants of the Watchers, who, as notorious pharaohs, kings, and dictators, have throughout history dominated mankind. In their publication, The Jadeite Advocate, they condemn the Watchers as, like super gangsters, a celestial mafia ruling the world.
The Peruvian-American anthropologist Carlos Castaneda wrote a series of books starting in the late 1960s using a Yaqui Indian shaman named Don Juan Matus as his source and inspiration. He has written over 10 books on the mystical perspectives taught to him by this wise man. The first book, called The Teachings of Don Juan, A Yaqui Way of Knowledge, details Castaneda's beginnings into the world of sorcery. Castaneda even earned his bachelor's and doctorate at UCLA through these studies, and he received the title of Nagual, which is a leader of shamanic seers, from Don Juan himself. Interestingly enough, the term Nagual sounds very similar to Naga, and has been used by anthropologists to mean a shaman or sorcerer who is believed to be able to shapeshift into another form through magic rituals, shamanism, and experiences with psychoactive drugs. Castaneda details throughout his writings his teacher Don Juan's experience with what he calls the predators. These are ethereal beings from another reality who leech off our life force by controlling and manipulating mankind. Castaneda quoted Don Juan as saying this about the predators, and it totally parallels the ancient theme of demons and spirits, or what others believe are an ancient alien intelligence residing in another dimension. Here's Don Juan speaking about the predators via the writings of Carlos Castaneda.
We have a predator that came from the depths of the cosmos, and took over the role of our lives. Human beings are its prisoners. The predator is our lord and master. It had rendered us docile, helpless. If we want to protest, it suppresses our protest. If we want to act independently, it demands that we don't do so. Think for a moment, and tell me how you would explain the contradictions between the intelligence of man, the engineer, and the stupidity of his systems of beliefs, or the stupidity of his contradictory behavior. Sources believe that the predators have given us our systems of beliefs, our ideas of good and evil, our social mores. They are the ones we set to our hopes and expectations, and dreams of success or failure. They have given us covetousness, greed and cowardice. It is the predators who make us complacent, routinary, and egomaniacal. They took us over because we are a food for them. And they escape us mercilessly because we are their sustenance. Just as we react chickens in chicken coops, the predators react in human coops, humaneros. Therefore, their food is always available to them. In order to keep us obedient and make and weak, the predators engage themselves in a stupendous maneuver. Stupendous, of course, from the point of view of a fighting strategist, a horrendous maneuver from the point of view of those who suffer it. They gave us their mind, do you hear me? The predators give us their mind, which becomes our mind. The predator's mind is baroque, contradictory, morose, filled with the fear of being discovered any minute now.
Don Juan speaks of the predator's desire for the energy of children.
He explained that sorcerers saw infant human beings as strange luminous balls of energy, covered from the top to the bottom with a glowing coat, something like a coat of plastic adjusted tightly around the cocoon of energy. He said that the glowing coat of awareness was what the predators consumed, and that when a woman reached adulthood, all that was left of that fringe awareness was a narrow fringe that went from the ground to the top of the toes. That fringe permits mankind to keep on living, but only barely.
According to researchers like Ike, these glowing coats of awareness are actually the fourth-dimensional reptilians and other entities that seek to access this world through the human channels, such as the pedophiles and black magicians they possess. To do this, they need a constant supply of children, especially from that of young virgins. Another frightening insight into the possible existence of malevolent, manipulative beings who control mankind from another dimension comes from a very prominent scientist and astronomer named Fred Hoyle. Sir Fred Hoyle was a British astronomer and mathematician. He created much controversy, but was mostly known for his contributions to the theory of stellar nucleosynthesis, and his unconventional stance on other scientific and cosmological matters. Hoyle conducted most of his work at the Institute of Astronomy at Cambridge and served as its director for several years. He was also a member of the Royal Society in the 50s and was knighted in the 1970s. He once compared the chance of obtaining even a single functioning protein just by chance combination of amino acids to a solar system full of blind men solving Rubik's Cubes simultaneously. On May 10, 1971, Sir Fred Hoyle stirred up the scientific world once again when he called a news conference and made the following startling announcement.
Human beings are simply pawns in a great game, being played by alien minds, which control mankind's every move. These alien minds come from another universe, one with 5 dimensions. Their laws of chemistry and physics are completely different from ours. These superintelligent entities are so different from us that to apprehend them or to describe them in human terms is impossible. These entities seem to be totally free from any such physical restrictions as bodies, and they are more like pure intelligence. They seem to have the ability to be almost anywhere in the universe in a matter of seconds. These aliens are everywhere, in the sky, on the sea, on Earth. They have been here for countless eons, and they have probably controlled the evolution of Homo sapiens. All of what man has built and become was accomplished because of the tinkering of these intelligent forces.
Professor Hoyle went on to say,
"The only reason that I have called this press conference is that no government on Earth would release this information. All governments fear panic among their people and think that if people knew the truth and knew some alien intelligent force in power is controlling, that the people would no longer listen to or obey their government."
It boggles one's mind as to why such an educated and esteemed man would make such an outlandish claim. Given that Sir Hoyle had a reputation as a scientist of posing controversial theories, some might not have been surprised by this at the time. However, this should lead one to believe that a man with such great credentials would not risk his reputation and career on such theories if he did not wholeheartedly believe they were true. Many of you obviously know that the idea of entities that dwell just beyond our plane of existence, meddling in the affairs of mankind, is an ancient theme that goes back thousands of years. From tales and legends of spirits, ghouls, demons, and monsters, to more modern accounts of extraterrestrials and even Bigfoot, the belief in such beings entering our world from another realm is very widespread. With advancements in the study of quantum physics, the possibility of alternate dimensions existing beyond our own is all too real. Many people who heavily subscribe to religion, especially Christianity, carry a literal belief in demons. They hold the idea that what we believe to be extraterrestrials, gray aliens, reptilians, Nordics, and so on are actually demons, ethereal emissaries of Satan. While some assert that demons and aliens are one and the same, as the connection between black magic and the reptilians is obvious, it seems the vast majority of people believe that the opposite is most likely the case, that demons are really aliens. The idea of otherworldly beings popping in and out of our dimension, either because they gained the ability through evolution or by using advanced technology, is much more probable than just magical entities that can merely appear and disappear. As your humble narrator has said before, it's up to you to decide, until further evidence emerges at least.
I would grab the heads and I would hold them under the water like this.
Louis, you are one sick lizard.
There's another one!
I knew it.
Spare the insignia of reptilians, jackalmen, monkeyians.
Slim hope. We watched those ships loading via spy star transmission. They're so packed.
Don't date robots! Brought to you by Spaceport.
One of my fondest victories.
You didn't get all of us that day, Repton.
Good afternoon. You're a funny animal. You're nothing but a tail. Where's the rest of you?
I'm not an animal.
What are you?
What am I? I'm a snake.
I'm enchanted.
Well, you should be.
I don't care! I want America for my birthday! I want it!
All right, baby cakes. Anything you say. After all, you are turning sweet 16.
We all know the zodiac derives from the yearly journey the sun makes across certain constellations, 12 to be exact, which is why there are 12 astrological signs. But were there really? Contrary to the solar cycle, the lunar cycle consists of 13. The number 13 is a sacred, esoteric number and was highly recognized by the ancient cultures like the Celtic people, as well as colonial Freemasonry. The Mayans even acknowledged 13 astrological signs. Now, we are once again reverting to a 13th zodiac. thanks to the result of precession, the Earth's wobble that happens every 26,000 years. Because of this wobble and the resulting shift, the Sun passes over a 13th constellation between Scorpio and Sagittarius. The change in this cycle throws off astrological alignments and influences the ebb and flow of cosmic energies, as well as the electromagnetic and gravitational energies that are around us. This happens from November 30th to December 17th, and the sign is called Ophiuchus, which means the serpent bearer or the serpent holder. To the ancients, it appeared to be a man holding two snakes, a two-part constellation pair called Serpens Cauda and Serpens Caput. Its Latin name is Serpentarius, which is a snake handler. Ophiuchus is related to Asclepius, mentioned in the first movie. He is known as the Greek god of healing, who could supposedly resurrect the dead. It is said that Asclepius used a sacred herb he received from the serpents to do this. Asclepius and the serpent is also related to the Caduceus, as well as Hermes and his Kyriakian, mentioned in the first film as well. Ragnarok, the Norse version of Armageddon, features a battle between the god Thor and a mighty serpent named Jormungand, who we mentioned in film 1. This legendary clash was for the fate of the world. Anyone who watched our first documentary will see that the epic battles between man and the serpent is a reoccurring theme seen in many ancient cultures. 13 years after the supposed end, in late December 1999, we have the winter solstice event that is said to take place on December 2012. The astronomers are saying that the sun's path will actually intersect with the galactic equator of our galaxy, a very rare phenomenon that takes place every 26,000 years. Everyone that is familiar with this concept knows that the ancient Mayans predicted this event, as their calendar is set to end on this date. Various theories have been posed as to what will actually happen on this fast approaching day. Everything from Planet X to devastating solar events, pole shifts to World War III, alien contact to spiritual awakening, and even an all-out destruction of Earth have been tossed around. Your humble narrator feels that it could be a combination of several of these. Others pose that it will just be another day. Either way, I would be surprised if nothing happened on that date. Anyways, back to this celestial crossroads of sorts. While, during the winter solstice, the sun converges with the center of our galaxy, Ophiuchus leads into Sagittarius, which points towards the galactic center of the dark rift within the Milky Way. The end of the Mayan calendar, or long count, marks the 13th and final cycle before it resets itself. This long count is believed to have began at or around the same time as the ancient Egyptian long count calendar, approximately 114 BC. What's also very interesting is that 2012 is the Chinese year of the dragon. On that note comes yet another ancient mystical book. The I Ching is one of China's most ancient texts. It is a spiritual divination system comparable to Western geomancy, and it is a type of calendar system. It is also referred to as the Book of Changes. With its 64 hexagrams, it converts cycles of time and depicts a process of unification and balance. The 64 outcomes multiplied by 6 lines each equals 384, and they would indicate a 13-month lunar cycle. The psychedelic philosopher Terence McKenna used a complex computer program assigning dates to the I Ching's 64 different outcomes. McKenna discovered a time wave pattern that just so happens to end on guess when, December 21st, 2012. The mystery behind Ophiuchus is still a new phenomenon to most. The idea of a 13th zodiac wasn't even a well-known concept until just recently. What is the meaning behind the serpent bearer, this interesting new sign that has been thrusted into the middle of the collective consciousness? It's true that the constellation Ophiuchus has been acknowledged for centuries. It was first mentioned in the 4th century BC by the Greek poet Aratus. In medieval Islamic astronomy, the constellation was known as Al-Hawa, the snake charmer. In most images, it resembles a man, not so much holding a serpent or serpents, but wrestling or fighting one. This mirrors the reoccurring story of man's ancient struggle with the serpent, whatever you want to interpret it as, be it dragon, reptoid, or otherwise. In the sidereal zodiac, which is based on where the constellations are now, the sun moves through Ophiuchus for only 18 days. The position of Ophiuchus is considered to be in the area of the powerful galactic center of the galaxy. Other experts believe that over time, the energies of Scorpio and Ophiuchus share the sky and have blended together in our consciousness. There are astrologers that pose some real interesting theories, like Richard Lee Vaughn of Real-Time Astrology, who says humanity has been secretly kept in the dark about Ophiuchus. Vaughn also says Ophiuchus is a symbol of masterfully handling the negative side of reptilian energies.
The constellations of Scorpio and Ophiuchus lie side by side. Scorpio is the sign of serpents, lizards, reptilians, and Lucifer. Ophiuchus, also known as the snake handler or charmer, used its powers to keep the evil tendencies of the scorpion at bay.
A bigger question to pose is what is driving the collective consciousness to reclaim the 13th zodiac known as the snake handler? Or better yet, a depiction of man's struggle with the serpent. Why was this archetype chosen to return during a time of so much negativity, death, and destruction?
There are no such things as real monsters. There aren't even any live dinosaurs anymore, even though some people like to get dressed up in costumes to look like them.
The people now! I want to see now jump!
School, I turn into a prehistoric hero. I'm in the Dino Squad, I'm in.
William Henry is an investigative mythologist, author, radio talk show host, and self-described seeker and teacher. He has been a self-published author for over 10 years and has written some 14 or so books as well as numerous video presentations. He believes heavily in the theory of ancient stargates evident in the art and myths of many ancient cultures. Henry speaks of the immense, transformative power of human ascension through art and symbolism. He has been documenting humanity's awakening for over 20 years. As we covered earlier in our ancient mythology section, the seraphim from ancient times were believed to be fiery serpents. Here, William Henry discusses the connection between the seraphim and the reptilians, along with his theory on the transition into beings who enter the rainbow body of light. Henry believes there are several kinds of angels out there, the seraphim being of the highest order. These beings are, according to Henry, of pure light and love, who could represent the next level of humanity.
Let's talk about reptilians in the Anunnaki, William. What's this major discovery?
Well, for years, people have been talking about these amazing ancient legends that are really worldwide about giant flying lizards and dragons that came to this planet and had a hand in founding civilizations from ancient China to Egypt to India. And in the modern era, we talk about reptilians, and people have a tremendous fear of reptilians. And a lot of this, I think, can be attributed to the work of R.A. Boulay and his work Flying Serpents and Dragons, and then certainly David Icke picked up on this and introduced this idea that there's this reptilian faction of beings that are actually controlling the world. They manipulate the bloodlines of some of the royal families, for example, the British royal family, and they're considered to be, you might even think of them as the heads of the Anunnaki. And I've been listening to this for a long time and try to keep an open mind about it. And then as I started doing this research into the seraphim, this highest order of angels, I noticed, well, first of all, when you look up the word seraphim, the word means the winged and fiery serpents, or simply the fiery serpents. And when I look at this, I'm thinking, well, wait a minute, isn't that the same as the definition of the reptilians? Could there be a connection between these alien reptilians that David Icke and others are talking about and the seraphim? And if so, how do you reconcile David Icke's view of the reptilians with this ancient view of the seraphim as the highest level of beings in the Judeo-Christian tradition? What's going on here? And so I decided to spend some time looking into this, and one of the reasons that it's very important for us to look at this, by the way, is because Maya 2012 prophecy centers around the reappearance of their savior figure, whose name is Quetzalcoatl, whose name means the feathered serpent or the winged serpent. Mm-hmm. So is this a David Icke-style reptilian being with a crocodile nose that's coming here to eat us? Or are we, in fact, really talking about the highest order of beings in the Judeo-Christian angelic tradition? That is Quetzalcoatl also a seraphim? Are these beings actually reptilian, or did the ancients somehow have a conception that something about the seraphim is serpentine or serpent-like? For example, they're described as resplendent and shining. But what is it about them that caused them to describe them as serpentine? And as I started matching this up, and I have some images that Lex has posted on the Coast to Coast site that show the correspondence between the seraphim and the rainbow body of Tibetan Buddhism. And what we see with the seraphim is that their bodies are feathered, they're winged, and their bodies are also vortex-shaped. These are the winged serpents. These are the quote-unquote reptilians, or what has been, I believe, misconstrued as the reptilians. These are not these kind of strange crocodile-nosed kind of beings that of David Icke's research. These are a far different type of being that we're dealing with here. And I think what we're actually describing are transformed humans who have achieved this next level, who have achieved the rainbow body, and they manifest. When they manifest, here's what I see happening here, is that as these beings manifest, they are traveling through stargates and wormholes. And in one of the images that I have posted on the Coast site, it's a Tibetan image of the rainbow body. And we see this awakened being, this enlightened being manifesting, and as we look at its neck, it's almost serpentine looking. It has this swirling rainbow energy around it with a gateway surrounding it. And when I began to ponder, and actually it was David Wilcock who affirmed it, hey, this makes a lot of sense, is that it looks like the serpent being description is a primitive interpretation of seeing this luminous or shining stargate behind these people when they first materialize. And this makes more sense to me, certainly, than this possibility that we're talking about some kind of reptilian creatures. Now, I'm not saying that David Icke is wrong or that R.A. Boulay is wrong. I'm saying that there's a possibility that there is this other group of perhaps crocodile-nosed tall beings. But when we're actually talking about a reptilian race of winged serpents, flying serpents and dragons, in the ancient world, they're talking about the seraphim. They're talking about the highest order of angels.
Well, that's a good point. Now, these flying creatures have been worldwide legends, haven't they?
Every single tradition from ancient Sumeria to Egypt to India to China has examples of these beings. And in fact, David Icke has a video on his website where he goes through and shows, look, here's Osiris. He's described as a serpent, and he's got ostrich feathers on. And my point is, well, why don't we key on the ostrich feathers and say he's a bird being instead of saying he's a serpent being? He's actually a winged serpent. If he's described as serpentine and he has ostrich feathers, that means he's a hybrid being. He's not just a reptilian being. He is, in fact, a winged serpent. So this is a classic example of how this gets underinterpreted. Perhaps there's a desire on the part of some people to just freak people out and to terrify them and to terrorize them by saying that there's this reptilian race out here that's coming to eat us. But I don't think that that's true at all. And part of what I'm here to do is to kind of say, let's back off that just a little bit, and let's just take a really deeper look at this, because if I drove a Hummer, I could actually drive holes or drive my Hummer through the holes in the research that's been done on these reptilian beings. And I might sound, I'm not trying to sound angry here, I'm just very passionate about this, because I'm very concerned that people might in fact be deeply, deeply misled by thinking that these beings are in some way malevolent and they're not here for our highest interest.
I guess because they look that way. They don't look friendly, do they?
Well, in the case of the rainbow body, they do appear to be friendly. In other instances, they are portrayed as half human and half serpent. A classic example of this is the Sumerian creator god Enki. He's the one who's credited with crafting the human body, of altering it. When you see depictions of him, he's portrayed as a spirit, specifically a water spirit, and he's shown as half human and half serpent. There is something within us that has been programmed to, perhaps coming from the reptilian brain, to fear beings that are half human and half serpent. But in fact, virtually all of the God beings, including Jesus, have been connected with the serpent. Moses describes lifting the serpent of healing, or the fiery serpent, which by definition is a seraphim. So Moses made a seraphim in the ancient world, and then later Jesus directly connected himself with the seraphim, saying, as Moses lifted the serpent in the wilderness, which is actually the seraphim, the fiery serpent, even so must the Son of Man be lifted up. So why we fear this is kind of strange to me when you have all of the greatest lawgivers and teachers actually and directly connecting themselves with this being. I think what's ultimately behind this, George, is some kind of just have to call it a conspiracy. There is a faction that is out there that does not want humankind to transform, that does not want humankind to achieve the next level of our spiritual evolution into light beings. They want to keep us down on the farm, so they freak us out, scaring us with the story of these reptilian beings that if you go anywhere near any of this teaching, you're in some kind of Illuminati plot that is here to kind of eat you for lunch, and that is simply not true.
Well, should we take the chance?
Well, what we should take the chance and do is really look at the wisdom that is behind this. What are they actually talking about here? Who are these beings, and who has been out there seeking to prevent us from achieving this next level? Part of it, in the tradition of the seraphim, these winged serpents or fiery serpents, they're described as beings of pure light and pure love whose frequency is so high that if a human were to encounter one of these beings, they would run the risk of being incinerated. So that's one reason right there, one benevolent reason for people to teach, or for stories to be inserted in the Bible, in the Sumerian tradition, and elsewhere, to be mindful of these beings. The serpent of Eden. Our friend Mike Heiser, for example, has pointed out that Nakash, the serpent of Eden, is in fact one of these beings. Is the bright snake or shining serpent of Eden is a fiery serpent. That means that the serpent of Eden is not a reptile, is not a reptilian being. The serpent of Eden is a seraphim, one of these highest order of angels. And in fact, in Sitchin's work, he says that the serpent of Eden is in fact Enki, a being who sought to uplift us to the level of the gods, and even to help us to exceed the capabilities of the gods and achieve our ultimate transformation into light beings.